Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. Today's guest is an old friend of mine. I actually met him at an event we both spoke at probably 3 or 4 years ago in LA. And he's one of the smartest guys I've ever met, one of the most informed guys I've ever met. We initially bonded on talking about our Audible accounts. I think I told him, hey, I have 200 or 300 books. He was like, hey, I have like 1,000 books. And he's the only person I've ever met that listens to more Audible than me. And he listens to substantially more audiobooks than me. So it's pretty wild. He has one of the most unique brains out there. So I just ask you, just like all my episodes, go into this with an open mind. We chat about freedom of speech. We talk a little bit about cults and culture. Really good combo. Just our combos always end up just going a bunch of different places, and that's what makes them special. So I enjoyed it. I know you will also.
This is Openly Outspoken with Jeremy Adams, where differing opinions are not only accepted, they're encouraged.
All right, we're live. We're live, Jay. Finally, after 10 minutes of adjusting this freaking camera, we are recording. Thanks for being on today.
Pleasure's all yours.
Yeah. That's the most challenges I've ever had, getting somebody's camera set up, so congratulations on that. You're one of my younger guests, too, so something's not making sense there. Are you an old soul? You're being really quiet. I feel like I'm like, when are you going to start talking? Normally, every time we talk, Jay's always talking. Now that he's on my show, I'm leading the convo. I think he's playing a game.
So, what's that been like? 19 episodes in 5 months. You've crushed it from my perspective. I see a lot of people doing podcasts, and when I look at the stats, it looks like people stop doing it after they've started. Like, it's like the description is not in alignment with what actually occurs. So the description will be this hyperbolic, idealistic concept, this is about to be the podcast of the 22nd century. Every week we're going to do X, Y, and Z. And then you look at the actual podcast and it's not consistent. So yours it's fantastic. So what do you think? What has that been like?
I mean, I just talk about topics that are interesting to me with people that I like. So I don't really have a set agenda. I don't really have a plan to monetize. It's more about, for me, more than anything. It's just, there's a lot of topics I feel should be discussed and should be discussed amongst many people. So you've obviously seen previous episodes. I've talked about racism. You obviously have a company that builds cults. So we're going to talk about that here in a bit. I mean, there's just a lot of things that more people, in my opinion, should be discussing. And we're fortunate in this country to have freedom of speech, and I want to exercise that right to its fullest capacity. So that's a major reason I started this thing.
How do you define freedom of speech?
Saying whatever you want, questioning things. Just not being told what is acceptable and unacceptable to say or question or think. I think it's important to always have somebody challenging common narratives and common beliefs.
Where's the line of demarcation? Like, is there a line that can't be crossed when it comes to free speech?
Is that what demarcation means? I was going to ask you to define that, use it in a sentence.
Yeah, and I recommend everyone, I learn new words every day because about 12 years ago, Steve came out with this, I believe. So Google, every day when I don't know something, I actually, and I'm not being, maybe this appear as a joke. Bruce Lee quotes. I just Googled some Bruce Lee quotes. So I'll Google demarcation, which is a recent word I learned reading Karl Popper. Noun, the action of fixing the boundary or limits of something. Similar to separation, distinction, differentiation. So it's like, I'm a normal guy, and now I have the wealth of all the spilt blood of our ancestors who died to learn and unlearn and codify and build this library of knowledge that's all, at our fingertips. So when I don't know a word, I look it up. And now, so that's the definition, a dividing line.
Okay, and to that point, by the way.
So how would you, yeah.
Okay, just to talk about the internet real quick, and it's something I'm a big believer in. I believe anybody, especially in the United States, can accomplish almost anything they want because we have unlimited access to information. We can learn any skill with YouTube, with Google. My first manufacturing company, I started at 22. I was Googling things hours a day. We just have such great access to information. It's a great equalizer. It's what can lift people out of poverty, and that's what is lifting a lot of people out of poverty, creating entrepreneurs. So I equally value the internet. In regards to what line is okay or not okay to cross, I don't think there is one. That's the whole point of freedom of speech. I feel if there was a line that couldn't be crossed, the Constitution would have had some exceptions listed in that First Amendment. I think those old guys kind of knew what they were doing with just leaving it broad. Because who knows, what's acceptable, not acceptable to talk about in modern day, that's going to change with culture. That's my opinion. What do you think, Jay?
Yeah, I think it becomes a very difficult conversation once you get into the regressive philosophy of I'm attempting to coerce another person not to think something. That becomes, I recommend some books for the viewers. Darkness at Noon, some Arthur Kessler, great book on the Soviets who, it's a fictional narrative essentially about the actual people who were coerced without violence to say they committed crimes they actually didn't commit in the Soviet Union. I recommend that book to understand how important the ability to think for yourself is. Because that's a symptom of all of that's a symptom of when we can't say the things that are on our mind in a culture. I also recommend, of course, 1984 is a superb book. Have you ever read that?
I started it on Audible. I haven't finished it, but I've probably got 30% of the way through.
What did you think of it so far?
Where it's government and news media manipulating people essentially to do whatever they want, and to just make normal not normal and make not normal normal. It's kind of what's happening in modern day. The reason I think freedom of speech is so important too is because you look at, I saw something from Angela Merkel in Germany recently. She said something along the lines, and don't quote me on this, but it was, I'm for freedom of speech except for hate speech. And it's that's not fucking freedom of speech. Who's to say what's hate speech or not? In 2020, you can say assigning children genders in some parts of the country is hate speech. Saying, yeah, that's a boy. And in certain areas of California, that's fucking hate speech, saying somebody's a boy or a girl.
Did she define hate speech in her rhetoric?
Not what I saw, but I'm sure she goes much deeper. I'm not an Angela Merkel
What
expert,
do you think their definition is? Well, what do you think the definition of hate speech is from the point of view of those that are saying we can have free speech, but not hate speech? What do you think their definition is?
I think we should encourage people not to use hate speech, but I don't think it should be illegal. I think there's a big difference. Should we be respectful to people? And that was Jordan Peterson's whole argument. He's which is what put him on the map, right? The trans rights thing. He's basically, I'm going to respect people's beliefs, but I don't think it should be a law that we have to use certain pronouns, right? Once laws start getting put into place to modify any type of speech, I feel that's a very slippery slope. And should we continue to just be nicer and more respectful as society? Absolutely. Should we make laws preventing people from saying certain things? I don't believe so.
all right, let's say that you advise companies and you have right. I'm just explaining what I know of you personally. You advise a lot of entrepreneurs and nonprofits and business, and also you have an organization that does well in its own regard. So you're a leader in a business and among business people. Is that correct?
Yeah, you could say that.
So let's say we took you out of that out of that culture and put you in a governmental position, and you became aware of the actual fact of what's occurring in the world, where, for example, you and me, people that normally we be leaders in one culture, business, now can actually influence individuals in all cultures. And so essentially the decentralization of information that would normally come from the top of the hierarchy, which starts with the centrality of the government, can now come through an infinite foray of nodes of influence. Essentially, we're right now, this medium that we're talking through, this podcast, is a node of influence. That the things that we say are going to have an effect in the entire world culture, starting with all simultaneously at once. So let's say you're advising a government. They're looking at the world and how quickly the entire mainframe, the entire system of governance in all cultures, and then, of course, they're not the same. So many different ways to operate the business of a government. What would you be thinking of how to solve to the problem of decentralization of information when hundreds of millions of your constituents, your employees, which are the people of the sovereign nation, whatever nation it is, can create their own narrative without consciously attempting to manipulate or act out malevolence, will create their own narrative in your organization. So I'll just paint the picture a little clearer. Your company today, let's say you have 30 employees, and each one of those employees has a mechanism of influence among the customers and all the employees that's at the same level of potential influence as you as the CEO, the owner. How potentially disastrous could that be to your company? And everybody thinks completely different things because of the technological opportunity for everybody to actually share all the different things they think. Now put yourself in the position of advising or leading a country and in the world. What could these pundits possibly be thinking of how to cull the herd, how to solve to that? So what do you think?
So you're saying, as a business owner, if I limit speech within my business at some level, and how would I take that approach to running a country if I was treating it as similar to my business? Is that what you're kind of asking?
No, okay. So let me just
like with
right now, what's happening in the world, and now if I use a business owner example, imagine you have 30 employees, and each employee now has complete influence over all the water cooler metaphor.
Yeah.
Times an infinite, because well, look what we're doing right now.
I mean,
this is an actual threat that the governments of the world are facing. How do they maintain alignment of the national story, the national symbolism, the national language through the mediums that normally act out that story?
Yeah, I mean...
So would your perspective change if you were in that position, is what I'm saying? Like, if we go have this thought experiment?
Well, we're also talking about the United States, to be clear, not other countries. I mean, and again, I'm not an expert on history by any means, but just based off of how the U.S. was founded and what our founders and initial citizens went through and stuff like that, you could see why freedom of speech was so important to them, where we're just more patriots and a little more conservative than Europeans by nature, because our ancestors, for the most part, fled their country because they hated government rule, right? So we have a culture of people that are a lot less trusting of government. That's why the Second Amendment is a very American thing, because we want to prevent government tyranny. And I think it's the same thing with freedom of speech. So if you just look at it as, could there be more chaos with freedom of speech? Yes. But I think that's kind of the sacrifice we, first Americans made, was we're okay maybe having a little more chaos and a little bit more BS going on in exchange for not having the government tell us what we can and can't say, as well as not having the United States, take over us and kick us out of our houses and do things like that because we're fully armed in our houses, So, just based on the United States, I think it's important for our culture. It may not be as important or as big of a deal for other people's cultures.
So what would you advise or set? Like, what's a solution to that? This is all hypothetical, but right now, currently, 360 plus constituents, employees in this company.
It depends on what the goal. You're asking what the solution is. It depends. I don't know what the goal is. We'd have to talk about what the goal. If the goal, you're never going to get everybody to believe the same thing, so that's off the table. Could you get people to maybe, instead of saying it on social, just tell their friends instead, and not, what's the goal? Is it to get along and to be a prosperous nation? Like, it would depend on what our goal is. I would say for the most part our country does get along. Crime as a whole continues to decline year after year. I think there could have been some spikes in certain areas this year, but crime has been going way down since the 90s. I think our country has a lot of areas to grow, but if you just look at crime rates, which I have, when everything was going on this year, I was looking at police brutality rates, crime rates as a whole, and they've all continued to go down the last few decades. So I think our country is heading in the right direction. And I think a lot of that isn't necessarily about speech. I think it is just about culture and belief, right? Like, I don't necessarily limit my team members' speech and what they tell people, but if we all have a same goal and are all bought into what the company's doing, their actions hopefully are going to align with that. And do they have some slip ups? And
what medium do you use to maintain that alignment in your culture?
I don't know if there's a perfect medium for that. I don't. It's just a matter, and this is where it's a little bit different, right? If somebody's not a fit for a company, you can get rid of them. If they're not for a fit for the country, they're kind of stuck there until they die.
So now we have an interesting dichotomy, because so we can be authoritarian in our actual personal lives without consequence. We could psychologically murder an employee, or rather culturally murder an employee by just ousting them, which I would argue also symptomatically would translate and the ping pong back and forth to our personal lives. We can easily block a family member on Facebook. We could easily fire an employee.
Could you argue this is why states exist, though? States exist in our country because there were different people coming from different cultures when the country started. Or we would have just not had states. We would just be called America, not the United States of America. Like, different states had different religions, they had just different belief systems. They ate different foods. Some spoke different languages. Like, isn't that kind of why states exist? To just go to the state or go to the region of this country that most aligns with what you believe in?
Well, I can speak from what the idea behind having states have meritocracy related to the centrality of the government. The reasoning behind that, from my understanding of the founders or the Federalist Papers and whatnot, was that along with what you're saying, was that the more, so think of it as just like the idea of the executive branch, the judicial branch, and so on, as that these levers of power being more balanced, because it actually takes alignment to get things done. So having the states have more power than they would if all decisions came from the central hub decreases the likelihood of tyranny. Because
yeah, that's
so
true.
that's along with what you're saying.
Yeah.
You're saying. My question though is, what does the government do? What could actually be the solution of a government in 2020 when the medium of influence that align? So let's, we look at it. It's academic, it's media.
The solution for
it's
what goal?
entertainment.
Like, what's the goal? What are you trying to solve? Solution for what?
How can the child of the culture, which is the constituency, the employees of the country,
of the U.S. Okay.
How can we have the ability to choose when we don't know anything about ourselves? We live our lives like autocrats, with our family members, with our employees, with our employers. We act out the psychology of the Hitler, of the totalitarian, in how we interact with our fellow brethren every single day. When we're rude to someone online, when we disrespect our best friend, and we can't continue that conversation. How is a government going to enable individuals to be free when individuals have never actually known how to be free? And technology isn't changing us whatsoever. It's revealing how little we know about ourselves, how to interact, and how to actually be free. So my question is, if you're advising in government, and you're in government, you're someone, and you're looking at how do we maintain the freedoms of our people when our people don't know how to maintain their own freedoms of their own person? And now everyone has influence. What's going to be an obvious symptom to that?
Yeah.
An infinite regress of tribalism, where everyone is fighting egregiously over esoteric ideas, things, narrative that aren't really rooted in fact, but are emotionally devastating, like we've recently seen over the last few months. So anyway, just think about, this is like an actual problem that's happening in our culture, in our world, that I don't see anyone even attempting to try to philosophize around.
Well, maybe that's by design too. Like maybe the structure of our government was purposely not to even attempt to try to make people free. Like that's where, if I understand what you're saying correctly, like I know extreme conservatives, right? They want to ban things like pornography, and because they feel it's going to make society a better place if there's no access to porn. And it's just like, I don't feel any of that, and just worrying about what people are doing on a day-to-day basis is beneficial for a government to get involved in on a policy level. Like, could it from an inspirational level, and as a, like, which is kind of like what the president is of our country, they have some power, but they're not dictators by any means. The president is really just somebody to motivate and inspire and hopefully bring people together. And
well, see, that's not that. Yes, okay, it's partly true.
But what if
the government, even if you're a libertarian, if you're a libertarian and you want limited government, you also, and this is what the founders wanted, generally, not all of them, because they were actually fighting the entire time, which is the whole point, is that we have to have an antithesis to our thesis, meaning something the opposite of what it is, for the actual truth to be unveiled. But we could talk about that in a minute. But my point is, geopolitically, we take for granted that, for example, we're a country where there's over almost 200 countries in the world. So at that level of resolution, what's the president's role? To actually be, just like you right now are a CEO and you have competition, to compete in a cooperative manner so you can win the competition of business while not destroying other companies and making them go bankrupt. We can all take this for granted, that the president's role is actually to lead the ecosystem of shared belief, which would be the nation, in a way where at the same time they can create cooperation through the competitive nature of the geopolitics of the world, which never goes away, as much as we want to lie to ourselves that it would go away. And for example, I can't even say his name because, and I'm not going to say his name, our current leader, because we actually tried to put an ad out, some ads on a podcast that I was a guest on, and YouTube banned it because it was sensitive conversation. I believe it was because we used the president's name, so I'm not going to say the president's name.
We have a business that promotes patriotic products. Some of them include Donald Trump, and all of our ads have been,
okay, well, all right, you're okay. Maybe it was something else that I said, but okay. So
I don't know, but yeah, anything presidential right now, right or left, at least on Facebook and Google, is being blocked, I believe, until the election is finalized. So hopefully we know we obviously are pretty certain Biden's going to be in office, but hopefully that's official and we can just move past that in the next couple of weeks, because I think once we're there, everything's going to open up back to normal on social platforms. People just go back to living life and maybe in 3.5 years really care about politics again. Yeah.
So my point, this individual, based on their conception of what is true and what is just and what is going to help all of us living in this culture, one business out of over almost 200 businesses that operate all different levels of resolution in the world, there's become a tremendous conflict between this individual and the macro, which we can take for granted in the micro. And essentially,
what do you mean by the macro?
The macro is the meta conversation. The meta conversation is a geopolitical conversation. There's almost 200 countries, and they have their own story. Right? We could call it culture. Let's break culture into 5 parts. They have their own story. They have their own language. They have their own symbolism, or language is. They have their own mediums. A medium would be like the news medium, the academic medium at every resolution. And through these mediums, the national story is perpetuated to the constituents, the employees, the citizens of the culture, of the company. And they either buy in and they have productivity that's increased through that buy-in, or they disenfranchise themselves from the culture. And some of the symptoms of disenfranchising one for the culture be they end up in jail, they end up, kicked out of the culture. So that's all occurring at all times. So the president's role is to attempt to do the things, and this is what affects our economy. When the president acts out a methodology, just like a business, of being competitively cooperative with all of the international companies or countries, right? You just use that analogy in the free market of cultural development of the world, right? This is how we're all developing all at the same time, or not. We can imagine how difficult that job would be, being that there actually are cultures which operate as essentially analogous to living purgatories or hells. Like a North Korea, like that exists. We're so privileged that actually a place like that on Earth actually exists in 2020. So
there's
just
a
to make my
closer
point,
version, by the way, just so you know, there's a closer version of North Korea, maybe not quite as extreme, but there are some overlaps, called Cuba, just a little bit south of the state I live in, which is crazy. We forget that a little communist country is super close to us. But anyway, I've been to Cuba a few times, and I'm like, it's like a 40-minute flight. I'm like, dude, there's a fucking communist country like this close.
Okay, so you were when you were there, what did you say?
Well, and again, this is why I keep asking you what the goal of the leader is, because this is what I will say about Cuba. I'll start with the positives. People seemed way more relaxed than happy. I'm sure there's many reasons why that is. Okay, the negatives. They're like extremely poor third world country. It's that living conditions are horrible. You can't drink the water. The roads are really bad. There's just every quality of life like that we're used to, that's like restaurants outside of Havana that, I mean, it's just like there's lots of regulations over what type of businesses you can start. Like they're trying to transition to capitalism somewhat. So I know there are some like legal businesses they're trying to encourage residents to start, and even allow some immigration for business, but it's it's scary. I mean, when you pay everybody in the country essentially the same wage, no one gives a shit about their jobs. The people that care about their jobs, honestly, from what I've seen, are like the street vendors and stuff, the more entrepreneurial ones. But when we go to the grocery store, I mean, we'll just sit there. Uh, this happened to me multiple times. We are standing in line and there's like employees talking and they're just like looking at us. And like normally in like the United States, when we're waiting in line, normally the person comes up and says, "Oh, like, did you find everything okay?" They're literally like continuing their conversation, catching up. And then like 6 minutes later, then they come over and check us out. And the grocery stores were out of dozens of things. Like there's just empty sections. I'm like, why is there empty stuff? And they're like, they're just out. Like it's just it. It's a really weird place to go. But again, that's why I asked you the goal. I would say that people are more happy and less stressed out, and they seem to be a lot more grateful for what they have, even though compared to what just about every American has, they have nothing. But they enjoy life. They're not rushing. They're always smiling and laughing. Like the group of people we were staying with, I went to bed at like a normal time, 1 o'clock or something. I woke up in the middle of the night to get a drink. It was like 4 in the morning and they're still up just fucking laughing. Like, like I don't know what it is. So there are a lot of things I do think are unacceptable in modern 2020 society. But again, back to the goal, these people were a lot happier than probably myself, especially at the time, and most Americans, with almost no material items and a lot of the nice things we have in this country from like a quality of life perspective.
So does that change your perspective of how things are going?
That's why I'm just asking you what your goal is. You keep saying what the solution is if you're a government, and it's just like what your goal is. If your goal is to make people as happy as possible, we probably should take a few notes from whatever the fuck Cuba's doing. Give your civilization nothing, so when they get something, they're they're ecstatic. Or is it to have free people and capitalism and enterprise, byproducts of that probably are more poor mental health because we're comparing ourselves to others. I mean, when everybody's poor, and Peterson talks about this, like don't compare yourself. What is it? Compare yourself to who you were yesterday, not to who others are today. Is that the quote?
I don't know.
12 Rules. When everybody has nothing, it's really difficult to compare yourself to other people and feel bad about it because you all equally have nothing. So nothing may not even be a thing. You may all equally have a lot. But when there's a bunch more people that are more successful than you, which is going to always exist in a capitalist country like the United States, of course that's going to affect your mental health, mine included, right? Like I grew up fairly low income. I still find myself comparing myself to like people I look up to and mentors and stuff, and it'll fuck with you, right? If we don't have a capitalist society, it's really difficult to compare yourself to super successful people because they don't exist. So, or go into a nice neighborhood and then right next to it, it's like a ghetto neighborhood. It's like all the neighborhoods are fucking ghetto in Cuba. It's just like that's what life is. So, yeah, just what's the goal, bro?
Well, what do you think it should be?
I think it should just be freedom and pursuit of happiness. Like I value very much what we have here. I think everybody can reach that level of happiness, if you work towards it, and have and build wealth too. I think we can have the best of both worlds. I think it takes work, but I do think we can have both, and that's been my journey, right? I started off in business really young, started earning some decent money, and then I was super unhappy, so I took some steps back. I'm like, what am I doing? And that's kind of where I'm at, now that I recently turned 30. It's like, what can I do that I love and that can also earn me good income and take care of me and my friends and my future family and stuff like that. So I like the opportunity to be free and be capitalist and also work on happiness.
What were you doing when you started your business? The first one at 22?
I was working as an assistant for this guy, just kind of helping him with a bunch of random shit because he started some other businesses. So I would just everything under the sun, help manage books, file docs with the state to open the business, do some marketing, do some sales, do some customer support. Just over the couple years, I helped him with a lot. So I was doing that. And then I worked a little bit at a restaurant as well, like at night to earn some extra cash.
What was the first business you started?
The first real business that I owned was the manufacturing company, food truck manufacturing company. I had been involved in other companies and I was like a founder, kind of like working with that guy, but I wasn't an equity owner or anything. So I helped him start it. It was just more as like his apprentice or whatever.
What was that company?
The
Like,
manufacturing
what was it
company?
about? Oh, that was the manufacturing company?
No, Prestige Food Trucks. We manufactured food trucks. That's what I started when I was 22.
And how long were you with that?
I sold it in 2018, so I had that company for about 6 years.
What was the one before that where you were just the apprentice?
We had started like a couple different companies, like this little a volleyball facility and a little manufacturing company that manufactured like these outdoor fire tables just for like patios and stuff. Yeah, those are the two main ones I helped with.
What led you to leave your jobs to go with this person? Like, was it a specific
It was
belief
just
you had, a
yeah, I
goal
just
that you were aiming to?
yeah, I wanted to be rich, right? I grew up not having money, not being around money, and I my earliest motivations were all money motivated. Maybe like 20% to get girls and 80% to be rich. You know, it was nothing about fulfillment or doing what I love to do. It was all about earning money. So this guy in my eyes was at this time, not so much anymore, but at the time was the definition of success. So I was like, if I hang around him and help him, I'll be like him. So I ended up being like him in certain ways and good ways and some bad ways as well. And then we eventually just parted ways as business partners and friends, but I'm grateful for the opportunity regardless. And it taught me a lot.
What led to you realizing that that wasn't what you wanted to do or be? Like, was it a specific occurrence, a realization over time?
The whole lifestyle that I started being around, like it was a bunch of guys with money that really were super unhappy that how they talked about girls and just super thirsty and disrespectful, and it's just again like just not a lifestyle I want to be around. Like they were earning some income and they were doing okay from a financial standpoint, but besides that, it felt really really bad for me and just kind of treated people disrespectfully, like, oh, I pay you, fuck you if you're not going to do what I want, I'm going to pull the plug on this deal. Just really disrespectful and just treating people poorly. So it's just not something I wanted to be around. It made me feel like
You
shit.
witnessed that.
Yeah, I witnessed that for years.
What was the realization that or how did you get out of it?
I mean, it
Because
just
you're in a culture, and then so everything's shaped by it. You're a part of it. Were you a part of it at one point, playing along, like, yeah, this is what I want, and then it shifted?
yeah, I mean, super early on, I just thought I had to show up and participate or I wouldn't be accepted. You know, if I would have said when they would go to the strip club, for example, if I didn't go with them and I'm like this new kid that's trying to learn and be accepted and maybe become successful one day, you know, they would possibly think less of me. So I would just go where they went and do the stuff that was common. And even though I had zero interest in it, really didn't feel good for me. And I think eventually I just got the confidence to just be like, fuck this and move on. It took years, right? It wasn't something that happened overnight. But once I started having a little bit of success, you know, a little bit of cash in the bank, a little bit of my own connections and network, I knew eventually I would just be able to move on.
What'd you do then?
Well, you know about our agency with Kevin Harrington. We merged our manufacturing company in 2015, and that same year I started an agency with Max. Well, I already had a little business with Max, but Max and Kevin and I started a company around the same time. So when we merged, I took kind of a step back and more into an advisor role in my manufacturing company, and then I went full time operating this company with Kevin for a couple of years. So we had that company called Quantum until 2017, and that's when we started Unicorn, which is the company I'm focused on right now.
What's different about this one?
It's ran by Max and myself rather than having, because it was Max, me, Kevin, and Kevin's sons Brian. It was just a lot of different opinions on how things should be done. Not that they were necessarily wrong. They're great guys. Kevin, was just texting him right before the podcast. We're having our mastermind next week. He's going to hopefully come. So we're still on great terms. It was just we wanted different things out of the business, and that's okay, right? I think with growth in business and doing business deals, if you're able to just identify that you're both good people, or there's multiple good people in a business partnership, but your visions just aren't aligned, and you can get out of a business without ruining a bunch of people's lives or ruining your friendship or being really mean and nasty to each other, I think that's a good thing, right? And we had a little bit of a rocky exit, but overall it was pretty positive. And we're still close today, and I'm sure there's going to be lots of business opportunities and deals in the future with those guys.
How do you approach conflict in that regard? What's your process? How did you, because I think this goes back to our beginning conversation. If we're going to have free speech, we have to be able to be responsible enough of ourselves to have it. So when you're having a partnership that's going different ways and you still have maintained the relationship, I would say that's analogous to I'm arguing with someone that believes different things than me, and they may say, oh, that's hate speech. I'm able to.
Yeah, that's a good question, and that's a valid point too. I mean, we just had to sit down and again, be as respectful as possible. Not that there weren't emotions and tension and stuff like that. If you could, by the way, do you mind moving your head to the center? Yeah, or
dude,
you're good. You move around. You're good. You're good.
And I really, if the viewer is upset of how I look with it, that's okay. I recommend closing your eyes, listening to the audio.
Well,
and just working
your
through
face is just kind of going through the cut, so it's like cutting half your face off, but that's fine. We'll just cut half your face off.
Yeah.
You look better with half a face anyway. So
yeah, it's just I do none of this. None of this.
We'll get back
for the audience.
We'll get back on. We'll get back on track.
It's actually all a part of it.
Well,
because when when we are doing everything that we do through the neurotic ideation of what could someone be perceiving of me right now?
It's not perceiving.
Then we're split psychologically.
It's annoying me because I'm looking at your face leaning off the screen, so I'm like, can you get the fuck back?
Oh, yeah, okay. So the question would be, what about that annoys you? Is it
that I'm trying to? It'd be like if we were talking in person and you were like had your head in front of a door and you were like shifting off the side of the door. I'll be like, dude, can you just look at me? We're like looking. We're giving eye contact here. We're having a good convo.
Well, what about my eye contact or anybody's makes that good or bad? Like,
it's just my preference. It's not that it's good or bad. It's my personal preference.
Like, if I'm not looking at you, do you think that I'm not listening to you?
You're getting more center now.
Like,
so I
somebody
appreciate that. When you're sitting up, you're really. No, it's not even about. It's just about.
I'm always, I'm intently curious about all of this.
It's just a communication thing. Like I was just talking, or you were talking, and your head's just kind of like shifting out of frame, and I'm just like, hey, can you like center that head back up, bro? Like I wouldn't analyze this too much because I don't want to get distracted from what we were talking about.
Well, I think it's okay. So maybe not what you're talking about, but part of what I believe and what Culture Matters is all about is actually understanding ourselves.
Yeah.
And so
let's talk. Actually,
I was asking, under the assumption that you're thinking, and you've cleared it up. It's that you think without the conversation, then I would just have assumptions of, oh, is Jeremy? Here's one assumption. This is a presumption, or if I don't bring it up, then I'm just thinking, oh, he cares so much about what the audience thinks. Let's just have a conversation. If I'm thinking that and I don't share that with you, now it's going to build up, and I'm going to have resentment.
Oh, no,
Jeremy's such a little,
I barely have an audience, so that's okay. That's not even on my mind. It's more for me too. Hey, real quick though, I want to go back to this.
It never came out of your mouth. You're too smart for that.
I want to go back to this.
You're laughing because you know exactly what I'm saying.
Well, I just don't want to.
Let's go back. Yeah.
We can talk about this next. I just want to stay a little bit on track because I was in the conflict resolution part of the discussion, which I think is very, very important. So that's why I wanted to share. And this is another thing about this country, right? I think it's okay to not agree as long as you're respectful of the other person's point of view, even if it's, in your eyes, a really stupid point of view. So what happened in our business, and their point of view isn't stupid, it was just different. Max and I wanted to just focus on paid media, like running ads, and that's it, because we realized that's where the biggest money is, plus we'd be more focused as a company. So that's what Max and I wanted to do as more the operating partners. Kevin and Brian, who are a lot of deal flow, great credibility, they had all these people that wanted tons of, imagine now, like 5 years ago, still tons of businesses hadn't started transitioning to digital, older school businesses. There was opportunities to build websites and do social media management. So they'd be like, well, we're bringing in all these clients that have budgets. Why don't we offer to build a $20,000 website and do this and do all these services? And if they have money, like, why wouldn't we accept the money? And those are valid points too, right? Like, hey, if they have money, why wouldn't we? And there's business here. They're saying, hey, build us a site. We're going to pay you. So they made valid points too. They're like, we feel like you're just turning away easy revenue. It just didn't feel right for the business. And we just agreed that we wanted two different things out of the business. But I don't think either of us at the end thought the other person was wrong. Like, I don't think their mindset was wrong because they want it. It's just not what we wanted. And I know they feel the same way deep down about us. And that's why from a alignment fit, that partnership structure, so that was kind of my wording too, right? Like, wording is everything in life. Like, from reading books, like persuasion and sales is everything in life. Hey, I still want to be friends with you guys. I still love to keep a strong relationship. Just this exact dynamic is not going to allow us to live our relationship to the full potential. If we were your go-to traffic partner and that's all we did was bust ass and running ads for some of your biggest connections and stuff like that, imagine the level of service we're going to be able to bring them because we're not focused on all these other things. We could be your go-to partner for all this. And then as a non-equity owner, you could maybe earn more money because you could market it up, or we could work out a separate deal and you don't have to be involved in the business because you're not an equity owner anymore, and it could be easier for you. It's just, that was kind of the discussion as well. Is like, we still value the relationship. Just this initial dynamic isn't the best for both of us to live to our full potential as business partners, right? It's like some people are better off friends than lovers. Some people are better off lovers than friends. But sometimes you got to experience both and make a decision for yourself on what that exact structure is meant to be. And I think it's okay for people to just have different opinions. And I think back to freedom of speech, no one is ever going to see things the same way. They're grown up in different households. From a mental health standpoint, we spend our whole lives building these belief systems and ways of thinking. We're never going to all think the same. And that's probably a good thing. But we can say, hey, you think kids at the age of 3 should be able to choose if they're a boy or girl? I think that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Maybe I don't say that, but deep down that's what I feel. But at least I have to like, okay, why do you think that way? And we can talk through it. And I may not be be able to get to like complete common ground, but I can be like, hey, I don't necessarily see it the way you do, but I appreciate you sharing with me, and I at least understand your side a little bit more than I did. And based on, the information you've shared with me, I understand why you feel the way you do. You're doing a great job of listening.
Gifts?
You're doing a great job of listening today, Jay, by the way. Is this your podcast personality where you listen? This is fantastic.
I love you too, man. I love you. Miss you.
Miss you too.
Remember that time we got a ticket for speeding too fast in the...
Yeah, I'll tell that story. That was funny. So we're in like the Gulf on St. Pete. It's 4th of July. And there were these jet skis a friend of mine had. It was my buddy Farouk too. So there were only 2 jet skis and 3 guys. So it's like, what are you going to do? Someone's going to have to ride with the guy. And Jay really likes me, and I turn him on and stuff. So he's like, do you mind if I like sit behind you, Jeremy, while you drive? It's just like...
I don't necessarily remember that part.
Oh, yeah, maybe I fantasized that part or something. But since he only had 2 jet skis, he only had 2 life jackets as well. So I'm like, well, if I'm driving, let me get the normal life jacket. And my buddy Farouk was driving the other one. He got the normal life jacket. And he had a couple kids' life jackets. So Jay threw on like the littlest life jacket. It didn't obviously like close over his chest or anything. So we ended up getting pulled over on 4th of July for speeding in a no wig. And then Jay got an additional ticket for not having a proper vest. So... it was really scary though because we got lost. Remember, we were out at sea for like 2 hours.
Yeah,
the ocean's pretty big.
Where we were?
Yeah, the ocean's pretty big. I don't know if you know that about geography, but it's a pretty big ocean, and we learned the hard way because we were.
It's good times.
Yeah, that was fun. And then we finally somehow made our way back. I don't know how we did because we were so far away. We were almost out of gas too. It would have been a bad situation.
Out of gas. The cops, they get, when you get pulled over on the water, it's not like they bring, in normal circumstances, when the one cop comes and you see like 3 more cop cars and you're like, wait, what did I do? It was like that, right? There were 2 boats. It's like, this is really what's going on. It's that serious. And they're like making fun of me. They were giving me crap because I had this little, I was bigger at the time too. Was that before I got hurt?
I think that was 2018. It was after,
I don't remember. Okay.
I think it was 2018. It was July 4, 2018. So almost 2.5 years ago.
Wow.
Remember, that's where you got connected to the like Mike Calhoun and stuff.
Yeah, love Mike. Shout out to Mike. They were very courteous about because we borrowed somebody's jet ski essentially. And then we're missing for hours on 4th of July. Like other people wanted to use the jet ski, but we got lost. And I have no spatial intelligence, so I didn't know what was going on, where we were. And then, of course, I'm sitting with you, and those are good times. Okay.
And then we got back when it was dark, and the little kids wanted to ride it, but then it was too dark, and they were really sad. Remember? So we just ruined the little kids' their whole 4th of July. We ruined it. Hey, real quick though, I want to take a hard shift. I want to start asking you questions.
Oh, you have like a script?
No. With you, normally I write down notes.
It just looked like you looked down.
Normally I write down notes, but a few episodes I didn't write down anything just because I knew this person could really, really talk. Matt Maddox was one, if you know who that is.
Yeah.
He can just.
How's he doing?
He can just talk for hours. This guy. So I'm like, I don't even need to write anything down and that's kind of how
How's he doing?
I think he's doing good. I saw on social he's like starting a religion or something. Maybe you guys can link up, or maybe a church. Maybe that's
exciting. Yeah,
starting a church. Yeah. So talk about. I'm gonna start asking. I want to ask you a question. Talk about culture matters, because I want to get into like cults, and that's something I always love talking about, and I feel is very interesting for somebody that's listening. So I know we just talked a lot about a bunch of random shit with a common thread being freedom of speech, and then how he ruins some kids' 4th of July, which is always fun. But let's talk about culture matters. What is it?
Well, I believe that when people, or we believe when people read to think, write to develop, listen to hear what is unsaid. Actually, is my head straight in the center? Should I be moving?
I mean, it's good enough.
Should I?
Yeah, you're good.
I'm thinking of you now, and I'm thinking, maybe I. It's just like,
Oh, as
is
you're
my
talking
hair commercial ready?
Yeah, your hair is really
Yeah,
long.
like,
your hair is really long, by the way. Have you not got a haircut in a year or so?
Well, okay. So just on an aside, I am growing it out. I also am not going to the hair salon because I'm not going to wear a mask. And at this point in my open conflict with my fiance, my best friend Jenna, we've not met in the middle to where, and maybe this will help. Maybe these people could comment in, give you recommendations, on how much potential hair could go all about our home if I had my hairstylist come to the house. So
just have him come to the house. Why don't you
Oh.
want to wear a mask? Can you talk about that? Because I know that's a very popular topic. Why are you not for masks?
Well, okay. There will always be maskers and anti-maskers. There will always be the left and the right. Part of what's made our Constitution good enough for about 100 other constitutions, or maybe more actually, because it was the first of its kind, for others to actually copy the idea of having things written down that create levers of power and opportunity for meritocracy and all the things that we talk about. That will always lead to two sides of the same coin that will have open conflict, that will disagree. I argue that this is the value of a monogamous relationship. A monogamous relationship is one where two people are intertwined in this culture of their life, where the opposite person is going to see all of the things that their counterpart can't see of themselves. And through the argument, through the verbal conflict, through the disagreement, love will be on the other side of that. Trust will be on the other side of that. Growth will come on the other side of that monogamous interaction between these two partners. Analogous to that, on a macro scale of culture, relative to that micro familial scale of culture, which the family starts with the two, and then the children, and then we'll get into that. And I'll explain the mask, because it's all related. There will be maskers and there'll be anti-maskers. There'll be Republicans, there'll be Democrats. The truth is unveiled to the culture through their interaction. And by the way, this answers what Culture Matters is about all simultaneously, and I'll explain more as I go. So the Republican has a thesis. Their philosophy is based on their psychology. Their psychology is based on their genes and their environment, everything that's ever occurred in their life, relating to everything that they've ever done and been judged for and judged themselves. So their psychology, which is based on their conscious, like what they're aware of, what they're not aware of, based on what they've done, that they are aware of and they are not aware of that they've done. That psychology presupposes the person's philosophy. The person's philosophy is brokered through their political ideology. Their political ideology now is brought forth in the meritocratic culture of politics, because the politics is the brokering of the culture. It's philosophy, which is based on the psychology of its constituents. So there will always be maskers and anti-maskers. There will always be Republicans and Democrats. There will always be masculine, what would be called, from a gender explanation, a masculine and a feminine. Not necessarily today in the postmodern world, gender of male or female, but there will be a yin and a yang, per se, right? And we only know so much, about even this conversation. But there will be opposites. So the reason I choose not to wear a mask as often as I am able to in a culture where that is a very gray conversation, being that it is a political conversation, because all science has always been political. We can talk about that as well. It's degrees of, and the reason it's such a friction there's a friction in the conversation, brings us back to the mechanisms of alignment of a culture, which would be the mediums that are used to create alignment of culture. One of them would be the mainstream media. So the reason I choose not to wear one as often as possible is because I'm pro-death.
There we go.
I am, and the reason I'm pro-death is because the idea that this is the trolley conversation in philosophy. Anyone can look up, Google the trolley. Do you pull a trolley and save? Do you pull the trolley to save more lives? Or now I'm giving like a bastardization of the trolley equation. But essentially, my perspective of the trolley equation is, if I'm going to have to kill someone to save someone, that will have a greater consequence to myself and my culture than inaction and letting fate have itself. And now this is contextual, so it depends on what context we're having this conversation. In the context of the trolley conversation, the trolley problem, and also just, any problem. So in the context of these masks, the reason I say I'm pro-death is because I am not for murder, but I am aware that when a culture crosses the line of demarcation in relation to the sovereignty, liberty of the individuals, and there's a subjectivity here that's based on the objective codification of what the culture is set to be about. And the codification of what the culture is set to be out in America is clearly outlined. Well, you say clearly outlined in the Constitution. It's like, it's still argued. We have to have it argued, right?
Yeah.
But the symptoms of a poor strategy for freedom and sovereignty is when you can't argue. So that brings us back to our conversation. So the reason I say I'm pro-death is because someone that wants to wear a mask, and let's say that the science is correct, that the mask decreases the likelihood of the coronavirus spreading and killing 1% or less of people. And I'm not being hyperbolic. That's what the CDC is outlining. But this is not about the percentages of death. It could be a 90% death rate. If the mask works and someone's wearing it, well, then, of course, logically that would protect them. But see, even having that conversation, you're still missing the whole point. I'm missing the whole point right now out loud. I've got to stop myself. Once an external force mandates me to do something that I do not want to do, now we're getting into a gray area that tends to start a domino effect to end up creating more actual problems, because it's a solution to symptoms, which solutions to symptoms that people think are problems tend to create more symptoms, which essentially are more problems. So if someone wants to wear a mask, they have the right to do so. Once someone sees that I'm not wearing one, and now they're putting their whole being into me, well, if the mask works, it doesn't make any sense that I'd have to wear one too. Now it becomes more of a political, ideological conversation. So I don't wear the mask as often as I can. This is also, it's extremely, so I'll go further with that. A heterodox idea is uncomfortable. It's meaning something that goes against the grain, being a contrarian, believing things like maybe the majority don't believe. It's hard to speak up when the room is saying you're wrong. The one that speaks up isn't necessarily right. The minority that has the contrary. So I'm not even, I would love to be proved wrong. I'm open to be proven wrong of everything I believe and everything I come to know. Based on my study, based on at many resolutions, culturally, I believe that how our culture is interacting related to the virus. I'm not discounting the virus. The virus is real. People are dying. That's terrible. And it would be good to stop that. So I'm not conspiratorial in this nature whatsoever. What I am speaking from a cultural perspective, how our culture is interacting with this virus reveals an antithetical political ideology to everything our culture's come to know that's worked really well for us. And that scares me. That could be a very dangerous road. It brings me back to the beginning of our conversation when I was asking you, genuinely, openly, I want to know, let's say you're in the person's shoes that's leading the country, leading the world, and you see how they call it misinformation. Well, it's not necessarily misinformation. Everything could be argued as misinformation. It's extremely complex, and now everyone has a voice, everyone has an opinion. That's very confusing. That creates an infinite regress, which leads to tribalism, and when we can't openly have conflict through verbal conflict, being disagreement, it always leads to violence, inevitably. And then, therefore, governments take authoritarian control naturally, not because they're trying to get everybody to, take a vaccine or necessarily. People could do that. But by and large, the human animal isn't aware enough of itself that it ends up creating malevolence out of self-righteousness. So the reason I choose not to wear the mask as often as possible is because it's actually, I don't believe that the wearing of it is, I think the cons outweigh the pros. I believe
the
that. So that's one
byproducts
thing.
of lockdowns and keeping kids away from each other and socializing and feeling energy of humans, like all not doing that to reduce the spread, you think is worse than the spread itself?
It's extremely.
When was the last
Once
time
we
you
get
wore
into
a
this
mask, Jay? When was the last time you wore a mask?
Well, so this is the thing. I can speak from so easily from this position because I have created. So one of the positive symptoms of my education, my virtue, how I live my life, which I'll finally answer what Culture Matters is about. I've created a life where I don't have to leave my house. We work virtually with our organizations. When we travel and I'm on an airplane, I'm wearing the mask. There's no travel of the airplane. And I unfortunately, I have to compromise my beliefs. And that's already a symptom of the gray area that we're talking about this mask. My original thesis here is about how there will always be maskers and anti-maskers, and there's important cultural. It can be spoken about culturally. There's important philosophical and psychological reasons behind that. There will always be conservatives and Democrats, like liberal conservative as basis, in a culture that has,
of course,
freedom of speech. So I'm saying that they're aligned, and symbolically, the enforcement of the mask represents or is analogous to psychologically the negation of the Second Amendment, because phenomenally, when you cover your face and your face can't be seen by another phenomenal being, it decreases the potential alignment for these two beings that without the necessary education to overcome oneself, to be able to build an authentic relationship with another that is not oneself, the primal bestial nature of the individual is to not have that alignment. And so it only desensitizes our human condition for everyone to literally not have a face. It's actually a big deal. It actually is a big deal.
I agree. My friend Shay talks about that all the time, how we're covering our faces and it like worsens our connection with other humans, which is a very natural and almost
so just to finish that
thing
point, to go on this point, part of the postmodern philosophy is that, just to go back, I spend a tremendous amount of time in our work, in my own personal research, which affects our work that we do with organizations, that goes back to, the life I've created is I have these this ends because of the means, and the means is my work, my research, how we work with organizations, who I advise and how I advise them, meaning the owners of organizations. The study that I'm focused on studying, the disciplines, are in alignment with these macro conversations. I've spent a tremendous amount of time studying the philosophers, the actual theorists that I believe are behind the current political conversations that we're having today. And just to clarify, the philosophy, the postmodernist philosophy, doesn't believe in the individual self. To actually create a utopia, because the answer definitely is in capitalism, and it's partly true. And the proposed solution to what you faced as an individual, being a young an adolescent who's doesn't feel strong in the world and wanting to be strong and doing it externally, that natural alienation that was created psychologically to you, that you realize, I can't be this asshole anymore, like these fucking nihilist loser entrepreneurs. People genuinely want to solve that problem for you and the world, and they happen to be on the left. What would be called the left, the progressive ideology, philosophy, the progressive philosophers that genuinely want to help the world think, hey, if we could get rid of individuality and see each other as one, everything will work out. Now, I'm actually not going to discount that completely. What I am going to say, and this is what a Peterson would say, this is what, like a Jordan B. Peterson is, spoken tremendous on this. This is what there's the intellectual dark web is like a culture of its own right among intellectuals arguing this postmodernist ideal, saying that, well, that's never worked out. It's not going to work. Look what happened in Russia. Look what happened in Cuba. Look at the actual history of how that works out. Look at what happened in Germany. But this is the thing. What I believe is occurring is it's not a conspiracy. It's a philosophy. And the actual philosophy of those that have chosen to lock us down, to lock the world down, believe in things that we naturally couldn't conceive unless we did our due diligence to study. And so I am, and I'm attempting to bring this extremely complex literature to the layperson, right?
I feel I have a good next question for you.
Yeah.
That can
And I'm not going anywhere specifically.
Yeah.
Well, I'm trying to.
Obviously. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, because my
point
real quick,
I
want to make the point for people is that we are at an inflection point in our species that this is revealing what we are and that we don't know what we are. It isn't changing us at all. Social media is not changing us at all. It's revealing our nature. It's revealing how antagonistic we are, how cult-like we are. And I don't create cults for a living, by the way. I originally realized how to do that, and what I came to understand was the difference between a cult and a culture. It starts with when the founder of the culture lies to themselves enough, their honest lies lead to tyranny. So I have cultures, not cults. I just want to clarify that.
I want to talk about how to create. I want to talk about how to create a cult. But before we talk about that, and actually talk about your business, because you're kind of talking about it, but before we talk about how to create a cult, because I want to learn, I'm working on one here.
Yeah. Culture, not a cult.
No, I want to learn how to create a cult. That's why I brought it up.
Well, we all live. Okay, so I'll just answer it.
Wait. The question you talked about. Science has a history of being political. Can you dive into that?
Science is politics. It's always been political.
Explain more.
Before Newton, the church, so when Newton articulated his theories, that altered humanity at another rung. The church had less dogmatic power. Einstein brings relativity and other theories to the marketplace of consciousness, and that alters that essentially is the anyway that also alters consciousness on another level. All of these things that occur at the very tippy top of the resolution of consciousness, from these super geniuses that dedicate their whole lives to figuring out reality, and I put quotes because it's still argued, it eventually trickles down into the funnel of the politic. And the politic is like, here's an example. You write a scientific paper and one person will read it. You write a self-help book saying the same thing in a layperson's terminology. You might sell 10 million copies. Politics is the brokering of the philosophy of the antithetical constituencies, meaning the opposing beliefs of certain topics, which is based on the psychology of the people that buy into those philosophies. Science has evolved Science is a process of understanding the world that could never be, and anyone could, look up a guy named Karl Popper, would be great. I'll explain. Could never be proven indefatigably, like absolutely. It's actually refuted, and that's the journey of science, is to refute the past agreed upon and quote unquote proven, in that moment of time, theory or mechanism of understanding the world. It's a constant evolution. And we're at a point in our human culture where it's evolving rapidly to the point where no one is certain. Like there are no certainties. And I believe part of the symptoms of that is the whole world is going, mad essentially, because that's creating, because of the simultaneous decentralization of all information, where each of us, all 7.7 billion people, can be our own dictator. And going back to the cult thing and the culture, every single person that lives operates their life as a cult leader until they don't. They may have no power, which, we define that with their competence related to their influence. There's a subjectivity and objectivity to their power, right? What people think of them and what they actually are capable of interacting and uncovering in the world, every individual. So I'll try to go back to science. Science, just like there's a right, this to explain it for anybody. Just like there's, going back to our initial conversation about free speech, we have to be able to have a conversation where we disagree, because one side is going to see it this way, another side is going to see it in the opposite. So for one side, they have a thesis, they have something they believe, and the opposite of what they believe will be the antithesis to them, represented in their exact counterpart. So the conservative, and then the liberal. The conservative has a thesis. The opposite of their thesis, is represented in the thesis of the liberal, and the thesis of the liberal, the antithesis, is represented in the thesis of the conservative. And their conversation and interaction, and all right, they're winning and losing politically, it reveals the thesis of the culture that everyone just agrees on until the next election cycle. And there's constant election cycles that are going on. Same thing is happening in science. Same thing happens in science. Same thing happens in your personal relationship with your spouse. The partners, they argue about how they see certain things. Example, I want to get my hair cut at home. There's reasonings why I want to do it at home. I'm going to have my guy come. Jenna does not want it at home. There's reasonings why she doesn't want it at home. I have a thesis. The opposite of my thesis is her thesis, which is an antithesis to me, and vice versa. Through our interaction, we're going to have a thesis, or rather a synthesis, and an agreed upon, all right, this is what we're going to do. Science is the same way. Look up, anybody listening to this, and I study as much as I can. Karl Popper he created the falsifiability theory. The theories, he was a philosopher of science, and among other things. The theories are not, they have to be tested. Like for actual science to occur, it has to be testable. And much of science is pseudoscience. And what I'm saying is, as our species evolves into this something else, essentially all science will be pseudoscience.
What are we evolving to? What are we evolving to?
Well, I would hope. So this is the thing. I would my interest in our work, what I focus on, I think the answers will continually unveil themselves in the interactions of individuals. And so I think we're technological more than we know. Any external extension of the human animal, since a stone hit another stone and chemistry revealed fire, that is technological. That's a technological interrelation with the organic individual. And essentially, our human animal will reveal that it is a technological species, and I'm talking about AI. Like, I'm interested in, as we develop in our culture, I think, cybernetics is the future of our species. I don't this thing. I really think it's an irrelevant. Even talking about it limits the potential for where we could be as a species. My work is focused on, and my interest is focused on, discussing the interaction. This goes back to the First Amendment. How we interact with those that aren't us. How we interact with those that aren't us.
What do you think is most likely? Yeah. If you were a betting man, would you say we self-implode as a civilization and kill ourselves, or something outside of Earth kills us? What happens first? How does human civilization come to an end?
I think it would naturally not ever. So it doesn't have to come to an end. We would evolve into something that we couldn't even conceptualize.
Can't conceptualize. Okay.
So I'm saying is that the essence of what it is to be human is revealed in how we interact with those that aren't us. However, there'll be consequences for how we interact. So let's say you're faced with a life or death situation. Someone has a knife and they're about to stab you, and you're with your partner and your child. You defend yourself. You kill this person in that struggle. Maybe not even contemptuously, like out of anger that this person would even try to kill you, but just in the struggle, they're dead. Now, if we take that as scenario A, scenario B is you purposely kill them in that struggle. There will be different consequences to the individual psyche, to their self, to how they interrelate with the world forever. There will be an example of this would be post-traumatic stress disorder of individuals that are in the military. Essentially, when they join that cult, their whole psyche is stripped down and they're rebuilt into the cult of the military that acts as an extension of the culture to keep the culture a culture, because we could take for granted that there's war, there's death. And so just to go back to my example, A or B, you decide to kill that to defend yourself, right? You're just defending yourself and your family, and the person dies. There'll be consequences to the individual that they'll have to work through. They could repress it, but they don't live with them. My work focuses on how to work through conflict interpersonally related to others.
So let's real quick.
Yeah, I'm trying to answer your question.
No,
it's complicated, but I need time to answer that question. I'm saying how we interact with others is actually what reveals our humanity. This is what some would call the faith, virtue, and no matter what we look like, how many genders there are, what alien shape we take, that essentially is something beautiful that could be maintained in the development of the species. And the more we develop that creatively, we're going to evolve faster without becoming an authoritarian ecosystem, which is likely to occur, which strips every individual of their rights, which would eventually lead to the destruction of the civilization, the reinvigoration of it, because I think that there will always be superheroes, essentially, that live, in a culture. There will always be that 1 out of 100 or that 1 out of 10,000 that are the Martin Luther Kings or the Gandhis, and so on and so forth. That these special people that are essentially going to unveil themselves to the culture to come up with that new idea, to lead that flock, as you could say, right? But in an authoritarian regime, the likelihood of that occurring is less. But the question is, is that even necessary in the next epoch when we're essentially harvested body sacks for the betterment of the technological or the technocracy?
Do you think another Holocaust situation could happen?
Okay, well, let's go there. Yeah, great. Okay. Yes, right now, the way that our culture is interacting with those that choose not to prescribe to the mainstream narrative is symptomatic of, it's analogous to the types of interaction that occurred if you read the history of those cultures. So here's an example. I go up an elevator in our building. We've invested in having a nice lifestyle to be at a certain level of luxury. I go in my elevator and I don't have a mask on, and a man and a woman, they both have masks on. He runs out of the elevator and says, we don't do masks, or we don't, what do you say? He goes, we won't be here, or something. It was like, I was like, oh, no problem, man, you know. And so he ran out of the elevator, and essentially, psychologically, if, you know, a culture that we're there, where someone would be that, and then I essentially, immediately, so psychologically, this individual's making, you know, I essentially am, the minority, like me as someone that doesn't have a mask on in that respect, have become an anomalous stimuli related to the unthinking, body sack related to the macro narrative that person, the likelihood that person would, you know, would be a part of a crowd to rip me from head to limb and throw me into a river and feel really good about it psychologically is high. Like that's where we are. That's extremely, you know, unsettling.
Yeah.
And it undermines everything that our ancestors have died, you know, so we could have this decadence and this entitlement. See, in our culture today, we're in a perfect juxtaposition of entitlement and resentment, or rather, it's entitlement and it's entitlement because of the privilege and resentment, like the unfettered emotion. The same dude that you were when you were still internally at odds with yourself, but finally materially well. The natural course for someone like that rather you chose to get out of that culture to attempt to be better, which is a minority interaction. The likelihood that person that's made it, that still has that, and this is the psychology of the cult, which essentially we're all a part of a cult until we're not a cult. As individuals, and how we build our groups, our families, why divorce is so high, it's all fucked up, is because the natural outcome for that individual that is still internally, or they're still internally at odds with themselves, that now has means, they're going to spend a lot of their time donating to charity while they do cocaine and fuck strippers. Excuse my French. They're going to be split in so many different cultures that contradict each other. They essentially are an authoritarian. Likelihood that if they have children, their children are disassociated, you know, from them. If they have a spouse, that relationship is now just surface level externalized. These are the symptoms of success, essentially. There's a great
question
lecture on this. Everybody, Stephen Kotkin talks about power. He's a great lecturer.
Question on kind of what our ancestors fought for. I hear the analogy regularly that, which I fucking don't agree with at all, and I think it's really, really bad analogy, but I want to get your thoughts on it. How us wearing masks is actually equivalent to us fighting in fucking World War II or something. Like, do your part, fight for your country, be a patriot, and wear a mask.
Yeah,
because that's
this is where it becomes propaganda. As soon as, and this is happened.
You know what I'm talking about, though, right? It's compared to like our modern people, because we don't really have wars. Very few people are sacrificing their life. We don't have many life or death problems. Not that we don't have some. I don't want to be completely ignorant, but we don't have. This is probably the best time for humans to be alive from a safety standpoint in world history, right? 2020 in Western European country or America or some peer country.
So to answer your question, it depends who you ask. If you ask Steven Pinker, Enlightenment Now, he's going to say yes. If you read, I just finished a book yesterday, Christopher Ryan, Sex at Dawn, they're going to say no. Before the agricultural age, it was more peaceful. This is the point to answer your question. We must be able to disagree. When a culture can't, it's a symptom of a cult environment that leads to hell on earth, period. Regardless, forget the virus. That's an anomalous external conflict that we must deal with, but especially under times of extreme external conflict. If the individual, and now if you're looking at a culture, if a culture cannot interact with its opposite self, Think of the country and the embodiment of the Republican and the Democrat politically. That's the brokering of the philosophy and the psychology of the nation. It's like a perfect spouse relationship. If it's broken, there's going to be divorce. And this is why people say, oh, there's going to be civil war. I don't think there will be. I think, but we can go into that. That, to answer your question about the patriotic conception, that is the epitome of propaganda. Because when you look at the advertising on the political party that says mask up, mask up, mask up, they'll say literally verbatim, this is not politics, this is patriotic. That is an Orwellian double-think sentence. It contradicts itself. That means, what that would infer is that the actual writer of that text and whoever approved it likely isn't aware that the road to purgatory is paved with good intentions. That, to me, is somebody that studies culture, which you should understand that word culture is amorphous because it embodies everything that is human. We are culture. That is something that separates our species from all others. So to understand it, you're an autodidactic individual. You're studying everything you possibly get your hands on to understand the human condition. That's why I've talked about different disciplines in this diatribe here. So the conversation, I had to catch myself earlier falling into the symptoms of this polarized conversation when I was arguing about whether masks work or not. That actually is a totally separate conversation. It's a totally separate conversation. We can't have that conversation to talk about the culture conversation. Whether they work or don't work. How we're having the conversation where the party that says this is, is demonized. If we're going to talk about a cult, when it comes to propagandizing, as soon as there's an enemy, hey, by the way, this is all parties, everyone has been irresponsible in this regard, on the right and the left. Everyone is irresponsible. Everyone that says, let's say that they're on the right and they call somebody a libtard. Someone's on the left and they call somebody a fascist. Anybody Kierkegaard said, if you label me, you negate me. Anyone that labels another with a personal pejorative label, a negative label, is discounting their own self. And if they believe in the freedom of speech, they're contradicting the culture of that constitutional amendment. Because the culture of that constitutional amendment comes with the responsibility of the individual not to use their word against another in the way that stultifies the sales, the epistemology, or not epistemology, the etymology of the word conversation is convert. All sales comes from convert. You're having a conversation openly and disagreeing to convert each other and come to that synthesis. So from a cultural perspective, everyone that we watch, and I read everybody, just to go back to what I've been up to researching, Ibram Kendi and the anti-fascist movement, Robin DiAngelo and the white fragility movement and white privilege, critical race theory and the literature behind that.
We should have a whole nother podcast on critical race theory if you're open. I'd love to
I'm studying both of these theories. Go ahead.
Real quick too.
We out of time?
I want to kind of make sure we hit one major topic before we're out of time. Just to be respectful of your time as well. Who's your ideal client, and what exactly do you help them do at Culture Matters?
So I'll tell you. We believe that when people read to think, write to develop, listen to understand, and speak to let go, they develop more value for themselves and others. So the purpose of Culture Matters, and the purpose of Culture Matters podcast, I'll explain that medium, is to uncover the genius of our guest with the goal to make curiosity cool. So in the context of the podcast, the goal to make your curiosity cool, the listener. The vision of Culture Matters is that human culture is open, curious, and focused on creating the future. And the mission is to read, write, listen, and speak every single day. Anyone listening to this goes to the Culture Matters podcast. They can, with me, go on a journey learning about the guest who likely epitomizes a potential client partner of our organization. I work behind the scenes as a culture advisor to only the CEOs, founders, only the main individual at the helm behind the scenes to help their organizations develop their culture. I only work with them. I don't work with the employees. I don't go in and do talks and enable them to learn how to do X, Y, and Z. I only advise the owners of the organization. The Culture Matters podcast is a medium for me to act out some of the things I teach these, I call them Alexander the Greats, or of course females too. Now I forgot her name, but there's a woman in Joan of Arc would be a great example. The Joan of Arc or an Alexander the Great. That would be the CEO, the leader of an organization, is essentially the modern day generals. So I work behind the scenes with them. There's a curriculum. Like if someone were to go to Harvard and take a course on X, there's many courses that these individuals go through. But before that is a possibility for them, there's a theory that I've created called the culture puzzle. And essentially, in short, I spend a period of time with these leaders of leaders, these Alexander the Greats or these Joan of Arcs, and I write a book about them based on their language patterns, essentially spending time with them and listening every word that comes out of their mouth relative to their partners, their employees, their personal, familial relationships, and I develop the company's story, language, symbolism, mediums, and a psychological analysis based on their language patterns.
So
that me and the individual go through. This is not something for your audience or anybody to be a part of.
No.
But that's how
what type of
operate in the world.
pain, like what type of pain or needs do I have as like a prospect for you where I'd want to come to you? What challenges am I having in my business or my personal life?
Well, so it's an irrelevant conversation because no one can. This is not a product or service that anyone listening would have the opportunity to be a part of. I act out what I teach and have a very meticulous process of choosing what organizations and who. We're in different industries. We're in mortgage banking, we're in real estate.
What do you choose? What tendencies or what, like, I don't know what the word was, like what areas of problems do you uncover where you think that would be somebody to work with?
Well, there isn't. Okay, well, put it this way: someone that it evolves, but this is anyone. How can I explain this for somebody listening? Anyone listening to this can develop more of who they are through like when they interact with a book, let's say, and have a conversation with the book. Like they're listening to a book and their mind starts to wander on audio and they turn it off or they put it to the side. I can't focus. No, keep going. Let your mind wander. Anyone listening to this that writes down their thoughts, their ideas, whether it's what would they consider it good or not, grammar is right or not, they're acting out activities that will help them understand themselves more. If they have, of course, relationships, whether it's on a phone call that's recorded like ours is today, or not, a coffee with a friend, they can listen to hear what is unsaid. They can openly engage with someone they don't know and ask questions because they're actually want to know the person they know deeper than they've come to know them. That will alter the way that they view the world. When they share things with people that they know or don't know, meaning rather than omitting and holding back, they tell the truth more often. They will reveal, so these those things, those activities, and there's others, that they're open, right? Because that's an act of vulnerability. Someone that is open to unlearning what they've come to know, regardless of their success that they're on, a millionaire, a decamillionaire, a billionaire, or a homeless person, I treat everyone equally. I'm listening. Is the individual open, and does this interest me? Right? And then we're in a handful of industries, but it's not we're doing business with 17 companies in this industry. No. I listen, which is what is that? What is listening? That's one of the questions I'm looking to answer through our work, through the Culture Matters podcast. See, is this an organization based on the hero? Are they open? Are they curious by nature? Can they conceptualize on that degree of resolution? And, that's how I choose. And, of course, at that point, they choose if we are the right fit. There's only a handful of companies, and there will only ever be a handful of companies that we work with, indefinitely.
Yeah.
So that's, but anyone can, the best way for someone to work with me that is listening is to just listen to the Culture Matters podcast and go along with me as I uncover people's genius and listen for their contradictions, listen for their pain, listen for the things that drive them to billionaire, decamillionaire, listen to their, people are not liars by nature. They're honest liars. An honest liar is honest in public, but they lie to themselves. Humans are honest liars. Why we're so quick to label everyone as a liar, why we're so quick to culturally contradict the First Amendment. We could have the First Amendment culturally contradict it. People that are for it are culturally contradicting it every time they have a life where they don't talk to their immediate family or past relationships. They avoid conversations. You're actually contradicting the First Amendment culturally because you've labeled one thing in the personal development industry is completely ridiculous. And so I'm a big part of that industry based on who we work with as well, who influence others that work with as well, is the idea of the hater. The idea of the hater is like the modern day Jew or the modern day Negro. It's a terrible word. It's actually a easy fix to the symptoms of conflict of the individual that avoids the entire problem of them growing. The word hater. It's a terrible, dangerous word. And so, anyway, so that's what I would say. The work that I do is extremely complex. It's extremely personal, and it's not for anybody. If they want more of me, they can invest in 30 days of thought and go about that of their own volition. But anybody listening can go to the Culture Matters podcast, listen to me prospect, because that's what I'm doing. And if you listen carefully, you'll figure out who it is that we work with. Our clients sign NDA confidentiality agreements. Not that I can't talk about the actual company, but they're personal, like the very personal, professional relationship. But you can go on the podcast. It'll be clear to you who we work with. Maybe, maybe not if you listen carefully. But if you just go along the journey with me, you're going to see me interviewing humans to act out what we believe. So that's what Culture Matters is about. It's an idea. I'm interested in being a part of answering that question. I don't think our species isn't, well, not that I'm aware of, even answering that question. How do we create certainty in an uncertain world when we've always had the existential crisis of a human being, of not understanding who we are, what we are, where we come from, when all at once we're completely integrated with each other and everyone's acting like autocrats and tyrants in their daily lives, and then they're bitching about how effed up the politics are. It's like, that's how you live your life. That's how you run your business. How do we solve to that problem? How do we keep idea meritocracy in the human animal when we're all children that are labeled parents once we have children? I'm interested in those questions, and so our work funds that research.
No,
so that would be my easiest
I
way
like
to
that.
explain.
And would you be willing to?
What drives me?
No, this is awesome. Would you be willing to?
And we will do more of these, bro.
No,
that's why I went on.
That's what I was going to ask.
I don't do podcasts because it's not necessary when you actually have created that culture. Like anyone listening to this, start a podcast. Start learning from other people. This is like the Gutenberg revolution, the printing press. That's what's happening in the world right now with podcasts. So Go ahead. I cut you off.
Yeah, no, that's what I was going to ask. Like, I'd like for you to come back on soon, and we can dive into more specifically cults, because I wanted to get into that, but we're gonna end it here, and also things like critical race theory. And I'm sure there'll be plenty of other things to talk about. So I'd love to have you on. I can coordinate Ronnie, have Ronnie reach out to Jenna and get something set up, get something on the books.
And I'm looking forward to having you on the Culture Matters podcast.
Of course, you can prospect me, see if it's a fit. You know, like I don't if I qualify.
We're friends for life, and you know, I really thank you again for having me on here, man. The first time Jeremy met me, we were immediately
boyfriend and girlfriend.
A very powerful relationship, and I'm really indebted to you for your candor and your insights, and you've been a powerful, positive part of my journey, and continually recognizing my value, which is something I have always struggled with. So I thank you for your friendship and the opportunity to come on your show and talk about these really important issues, and commend you for everything you're doing, because you're one person that I could definitely say is doing great with your work, because you're courageous in that way to actually go out and have conversations that are going to make people uncomfortable, and to just, do it. It's really exciting to see, man.
Well, appreciate that greatly, man. And likewise, I value our friendship, and looking forward to continuing to grow it and have some more good combos. So thanks, man.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Openly Outspoken with Jeremy Adams. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast player so you get updated when new episodes are live. If you enjoyed this episode, the best way to support is to leave a 5-star review and share the podcast with people in your life that you feel would benefit from these types of discussions. Visit openlyoutspoken.com for additional details on the show. Find out how to connect with Jeremy on social media and learn more information about Jeremy's personal and business life. We'll see you next time.